Imagine waking up one morning with a gnawing emptiness that clings not to your belly, but to the very marrow of your being, a hollowness that no amount of distraction or indulgence can reach. You scan your surroundings, the sleek apartment, the buzzing phone, the unread messages stacked like silent witnesses. You have everything you thought you wanted, the comfort, the success, the connections. Yet something vital, something you can neither name nor grasp, seems completely absent. How could you possess so much and simultaneously feel so achingly devoid? How can abundance culminate in absence? This is the paradox that haunts our modern existence. The more external riches we accumulate, the more internal poverty seems to spread. It's a contradiction that gnaws beneath the surface of quiet mornings and noisy days alike. We live in an era where material wealth has never been more attainable, yet a profound spiritual destitution grows like an invisible epidemic, infecting hearts and minds with a sense of irreparable loss. What is this poverty that no paycheck can cure, no achievement can mask, and no social approval can soothe? How do you explain a world where loneliness thrives amid packed calendars and constant connectivity, where anxiety escalates despite unprecedented medical knowledge, where disappointment festers beneath the glittering veneer of success? Imagine for a moment a garden poured into a glass jar. Will it survive? The colors will fade, the fragrance will vanish, and the very life that once teemed under open skies will suffocate behind transparent walls. In many ways, that jar reflects the condition of our souls. We have enclosed ourselves in cages of convenience and conformity, trading depth for surface, silence for noise, mystery for data. The spirit, if we can still call it that, flutters desperately against its glass walls, longing for air and sunlight it no longer recognizes. Yet we go about our days admiring the jar, proud of its clarity, mistaking captivity for clarity. It is not merely a matter of belief or faith, nor a question solely reserved for the devout. Spiritual poverty is a silent, subtle condition that can seep into anyone's life. It is a famine for meaning, a thirst for connection with something greater than yourself that leaves you parched in a desert of distractions. It is a hunger so profound it can twist the mind with despair, yet it whispers its presence quietly, often ignored even by those it consumes. You might not recognize it at first because it wears 1,000 masks: stress, fatigue, cynicism, restlessness, apathy, all symptoms of an inner void that refuses to be filled by achievements or possessions. Have you ever felt that flicker of dissatisfaction deep within, that restless spirit whispering in moments of silence? That tiny voice that questions, "Is this all there is?" but is drowned out by the cacophony of obligations and digital noise. You may have pursued happiness relentlessly, only to find it elusive, like a mirage shimmering just beyond the horizon. Perhaps you have chased success, only to taste its bitterness, or sought love and belonging but still feel profoundly disconnected. Does this not suggest something fundamentally wrong with the way we understand fulfillment? Could it be that the very paths society champions are paved thinly, leading us not toward abundance but toward an abyss? Consider how paradoxically isolated we have become. Despite the proliferation of social media, the constant barrage of updates and interactions, true connection often feels frayed. How many conversations leave you feeling unseen or unheard, more alone amid crowds than you were in solitude? How often have you scrolled through endless streams of curated lives, feeling the slow erosion of your own sense of worth in comparison? These experiences are not mere inconveniences. They are symptoms of a deeper disconnect, a spiritual poverty that deprives you of belonging not just to others but to yourself. There is a growing body of evidence revealing a public health crisis that is rarely spoken of in these terms: despair, depression, anxiety, suicide rates climbing worldwide. Yet behind these statistics lies a deeper narrative that statistics cannot capture. The epidemic is not just mental or emotional, it is spiritual. It is the loss of intimacy with the self, with the world, with the sacred. And it is an epidemic that transcends geography, culture, and creed, touching the wealthy and poor, young and old, skeptics and believers alike. What kind of poverty is this, without poverty's usual markers of deprivation? What kind of deprivation is this, when everything seems readily within reach? If you begin to look closely, you might see the unnoticed cracks in the foundation of contemporary life. The relentless pursuit of productivity has hollowed out leisure and presence. The digital revolution has traded depth for distraction. Consumer culture has commodified meaning itself. In this whirlwind, the inner world is marginalized, dismissed as irrelevant or impractical. The sacred is privatized, spiritual exploration reduced to cliches or escapism. The paradox is staggering. While technological advancement should theoretically liberate us, it often enslaves us to superficiality. This leaves many wondering if the real progress is not being measured in gadgets or GDP, but in the richness of inner life, that silent territory where true fulfillment blooms. What does it mean then to be spiritually poor in an age of plenty? Is it an absence, a void, or perhaps an absence disguised as fullness? Could it be that spiritual poverty is the persistent ache of the soul, a hunger in a world starved of meaning? If so, how does this ache manifest in your life? Does it appear as subtle dissatisfaction, a creeping numbness, or a desperate search for purpose? Most crucially, is it possible to recognize this condition before it crystallizes into despair? These questions are not just abstract puzzles. They beckon you toward a confrontation with your own experience. They invite you to strip away the distractions and gaze unflinchingly into that hidden emptiness that modern life often conceals. Yet, to do so is to enter a territory both terrifying and hopeful, a confrontation with what has been lost and what might be rediscovered. The path ahead does not promise easy answers, but it does promise urgency and truth. As you sit with these questions, the silence that follows is heavy, charged with potential. The unspoken epidemic of spiritual poverty is much more than a metaphor. It is a call to awareness, a demand for awakening. And what emerges next is not a guidebook or a prescription, but an invitation to journey deeper into the paradox itself, to untangle the threads that bind abundance and emptiness, success and despair, connection and isolation. What if the key to overcoming this epidemic lies not in seeking more outwardly, but in daring to explore the depths within? What if the cure is not external but profoundly internal? The next step waits beyond this moment of recognition, one that will take you far from the surface illusions of plenty and into the heart of what it truly means to be spiritually alive. You might wonder how this silent affliction, this creeping spiritual poverty, has taken root so deeply in the soil of your existence. Why does it thrive despite the boundless material wealth, the dizzying connectivity, the ceaseless parade of distractions meant to fill the void? To understand this, you must first accept that the epidemic is not a sudden calamity, but the inevitable consequence of profound fractures woven through the very fabric of modern consciousness. Imagine the human psyche as a vast, dimly lit cavern, ancient and layered. Carl Jung described the shadow as the neglected or denied parts of the self, the aspects we refuse to face, the darkness we bury deep within. The epidemic of spiritual poverty is born in this shadow, nurtured by a relentless refusal to engage with the inner world. It thrives when you are urged, both overtly and subtly, to present a polished surface while the depths of your being grow parched, cracked, and empty. The cultural imperative to perform, to consume, to appear successful constructs an ecosystem where your soul is starved not for lack of nourishment, but for lack of authentic encounter. Friedrich Nietzsche, with his trenchant insight into the crisis of meaning in the modern age, spoke of the death of God, a metaphor not merely for the decline of religion, but for the collapse of any transcendent anchor. Without this anchor, you are adrift in an ocean of relativism, bombarded by conflicting values that feel external rather than emergent from your own truth. Nietzsche's warning cuts to the bone. In the vacuum left by vanished certainties, nihilism sneaks in like a silent predator, promising liberation but delivering despair. How often have you felt this silent nihilism gnawing at your core, even amid vibrant social scenes or personal achievements? The paradox is unyielding. The dissolution of traditional meaning leaves you ostensibly free but existentially orphaned. Arthur Schopenhauer's bleak vision deepens this perspective. He saw life as an endless striving driven by an insatiable will, a blind force that perpetually hungers, resulting in suffering. What if the spiritual poverty you feel is a manifestation of this relentless will without a guiding wisdom? A will that drives you to chase desires, achievements, or identities without ever quenching the thirst at the root of your being. This endless craving, masked as ambition or drive, only amplifies the inner emptiness because it misses the essential truth. That fulfillment lies not in accumulation but in transcendence of the will itself. Yet, to reduce this epidemic to philosophy alone would be to ignore the societal forces at play, the external architecture shaping your consciousness with subtle tyranny. Aldous Huxley foresaw a world where technological marvels and consumer culture conspire to anesthetize the soul. The distractions are not random, they are designed. The endless scroll of social media feeds, the curated images of perfect lives, the constant barrage of notifications. These are not just annoyances but sophisticated mechanisms that fracture your attention, diffuse your presence, and sever you from meaningful experience. The spiritual poverty you endure is entangled in this web, a cacophony of voices drowning out your own inner whisper. How often have you found yourself staring at a screen, only to realize that the moment has escaped, leaving behind a residue of numbness? Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism demands that you confront the terrifying freedom of choice, acknowledging that you are condemned to be free in a world without predetermined meaning. This freedom, paradoxically, is both a gift and a burden. When you disengage from spiritual inquiry, the responsibility to carve out a meaningful self is abdicated to external narratives and fashionable ideologies. The resulting dissonance fractures your identity, leaving you a stranger to yourself. Have you noticed this dissonance in your own life? The tug between who others expect you to be and who you sense you might actually be. This is the silent erosion of spiritual vitality. Viktor Frankl, who emerged from the abyss of the Holocaust, offered a piercing antidote. He argued that meaning, even in suffering, is the central human drive. But how can meaning be found when the spiritual landscape appears barren? When your internal compass spins aimlessly, and the noise of modern existence drowns out the call to purpose? Frankl's insight implies that spiritual poverty is not merely about absence, but about the failure to respond to the call toward meaning. It is the silent refusal to engage with the existential challenge, leading not only to despair, but to a loss of will itself. This hidden epidemic warps behavior, emotions, and identity in insidious ways. It infects your decisions with subtle desperation, the choice to numb rather than feel, to escape rather than confront. It distorts your emotions into chronic dissatisfaction or restless agitation, as if something vital is missing but remains unnamed. It fractures identity into roles and masks, each constructed to fend off the terror of emptiness but ultimately intensifying it. This is no minor ailment. It is a systemic breakdown, a psychic wound that corrodes from within. And yet, beneath the surface symptoms lies a deeper consequence that the philosophers hint at but few dare to name fully. A collective numbness, a spiritual anemia permeating not just individuals, but entire societies. This spiritual bankruptcy threatens to unravel the social fabric itself, because what holds communities together is not wealth or technology, but shared depths of meaning, empathy, and purpose. What happens when these reservoirs run dry? When the collective soul is as impoverished as your own? You may glimpse the shadows stretching out beyond your personal experience, echoes of unrest, alienation, and subtle despair, rippling through culture, politics, and everyday relationships. The spiritual epidemic is not confined within you but bleeds outward, shaping the world in ways unseen, yet palpably felt. Could it be that the crisis you feel is a symptom of a far greater disease? And if so, what are the shadows concealing? What truth waits behind the veil of this pervasive emptiness, waiting to be unearthed, called forth, or perhaps feared? The silence after these questions is not empty, it is pregnant with urgency. The epidemic is not a distant problem to be solved later, it is an intimate fracture within you, a call that you cannot ignore without consequence. The paradox remains: abundance outside and starvation within, connection everywhere and loneliness at the core. To move forward, you must peer even deeper, beyond the intellectual understanding of this malaise, into the visceral reality of what it does to your spirit, your relationships, your very capacity to live. This journey will demand more than insight. It will demand courage, the courage to confront the abyss and perhaps the promise that awaits on the other side. You might not notice it at first, the subtle way spiritual poverty seeps into the architecture of your mind and society, like a quiet fog blurring the contours of clarity and meaning. It is not loud, not explosive. It is an insidious shaping force, knitting itself into your perceptions, twisting how you interpret joy, pain, success, and failure. It wraps around your brain's wiring, altering the very way you see yourself and the world, often before you even realize you've been ensnared. Consider the biases your mind clings to, unseen guardians and gatekeepers that skew your interpretations of reality. Confirmation bias, for example, insists that you seek out information that reinforces your current worldview while dismissing anything that threatens it. It's a kind of mental comfort food, feeding your sense of identity but starving your potential for growth. In a state of spiritual poverty, this bias doesn't just keep you trapped in outdated beliefs. It cements a hollow worldview, one that never ventures toward the profound or the transcendent. Your mind becomes a fortress of familiar shadows rather than an open field of light. And then there's the negativity bias, an evolutionary relic that once kept your ancestors vigilant against predators, but now leaves you disproportionately attuned to fear, failure, and scarcity. Your brain is wired to see threats, to anticipate loss, and in a culture saturated with anxious headlines and transactional relationships, this bias becomes an unrelenting echo chamber of dread. When the spirit is impoverished, this bias mutates into something more sinister, a chronic ache of dissatisfaction, where moments of joy slip through your fingers like sand, yet disappointments cling like scars. This is not mere pessimism. It is a deep neural pattern reinforcing a persistent sense of inner lack. But why does this happen? Why does the collective apparatus of your mind, and by extension the society around you, seem so willingly complicit in this spiritual starvation? The answer lies partly in the architecture of your brain itself, where the prefrontal cortex, the seat of complex reasoning and self-reflection, is often at odds with the limbic system, home to emotion and habit. In times of stress, scarcity, or relentless distraction, the emotional brain hijacks your responses, sidelining deeper contemplation. The modern world is an endless stream of stimuli designed to hijack this very system: notifications, advertisements, curated social media feeds, each an invitation to deflect from emptiness, to fill the void with noise, consumption, or fleeting pleasures. Cultural conditioning further weaves its threads into this tapestry. From a young age, you are taught to equate worth with external achievement: the size of your paycheck, the prestige of your career, the number of likes or followers. These markers become proxies for identity, yet they are brittle substitutes for genuine spiritual depth. The mantra "more is better" pervades, encouraging a relentless chase after external validation while the internal reservoir runs dry. How odd, then, that a society so materially rich can remain so spiritually famished. What cultural narratives insist that you dismiss, suppress, or ignore the hunger of your soul? What programming has trained your nervous system to jump at every distraction rather than sit with the uncomfortable silence of inner emptiness? At a societal scale, this spiritual poverty molds the very institutions meant to serve and uplift you. Education becomes a training ground for productivity, stripping the human being down to a cog in a vast economic machine. Healthcare often treats symptoms without addressing underlying existential despair. Politics, fractured and fractious, offers no genuine sanctuary or shared vision, only cycles of blame and superficial gestures. Communities, once places of belonging and shared meaning, now splinter into isolated islands tethered by thin digital threads. Spiritual poverty does not just affect the individual, it haunts the collective, creating a groundless culture where alienation and mistrust flourish beneath the surface. Feel the weight of this invisibility. The trap isn't just external, it is internal. The very mechanisms designed to protect you, your brain's evolutionary wiring and your cultural conditioning, conspire to keep you locked in place, muffling the cry of your deeper self. The urgency to escape this trap is not a luxury. It is a matter of profound survival for your sanity, your relationships, your capacity to impact the world meaningfully. And yet, the escape is elusive because the walls of this prison are made with your own habits, your own conditioned perceptions, your own ingrained fears. Look closely at the paradox. You seek connection but recoil from vulnerability, craving meaning but fleeing discomfort, yearning for transcendence but gripping tightly to the safety of the familiar. This is the silent epidemic's cleverest trick. It presents itself as safety, normalcy, or even success, while it slowly erodes the foundation beneath your feet. Every moment you acquiesce to this pattern, the deeper the chasm beneath your spirit grows, until one day, the ground feels unsteady not just under you but beneath everyone who shares this condition. Yet within this murky landscape lies a tension pregnant with possibility. The cognitive biases and cultural languages that bind you also mark the contours of the prison's walls, walls you have the power to dismantle, but only if you first become aware of their structure, their imposition. To challenge the unseen grip of spiritual poverty, you must first become the witness to your own entrancement, the observer who sees the biases at play, the conditioning at work, the neurological patterns that enslave. This witnessing is no passive act. It is the first crack in the fortress, the gateway to something beyond habitual limitation. You sense, even before fully understanding, that there is something more, something your spirit instinctively reaches toward even as the fog thickens. You feel the urgency, a silent alarm vibrating beneath the noise of routine. This is not a call for another distraction, another quick fix, or another superficial reprieve. It is a summons to awaken in the truest sense, an awakening that cannot be postponed without cost. But what exactly lies beyond this trap? What hidden terrain awaits those who dare to face the abyss within their own minds and cultures? The answer hovers just beyond the edge of consciousness, shimmering with both promise and uncertainty. To reach it, you must first fully grasp the invisible chains that have held you captive for so long. Only then can you begin the arduous, vital journey toward liberation. Look closely, then, at the very ground beneath your feet, the air you breathe, the thoughts threading through your mind. What if everything you believed about progress, fulfillment, and the nature of enough was not only incomplete but inverted, turned inside out by the very culture that claims to free you? What if the notion of scarcity isn't an external fact but an internal experience shaped by a deeply ingrained narrative, so pervasive that it masquerades as the only reality? You have been taught to chase, to own, to accumulate as if your worth depended on this endless motion, but here lies the paradox. In pursuing more, you have been quietly emptied. This is the essence of spiritual poverty, an absence birthed not from lack but from misdirection. Imagine, then, a radical shift in perspective, not a tweak but a seismic realignment. Instead of seeing yourself as a consumer trapped in a marketplace of desires, picture yourself as a creator, sculptor, or gardener, one who cultivates richness from within soil most assume barren. This is no airy idealism, but a grounded rebellion against the logic that keeps you bound. To reclaim control over your inner landscape, you must first abandon the hunger that the world sells as normal and instead confront the truth. Abundance is not found in the external accumulation of things, but in the internal expansion of meaning. This transformation requires a dangerous, beautiful leap, to embrace less, and in embracing less, to discover more. It sounds paradoxical because it is a reversal of everything you've been told about success and happiness. Yet history teems with figures who embodied this counterintuitive truth, blazing trails through the wilderness of their own spiritual deserts. Consider Diogenes of Sinope, the ancient cynic philosopher who sought nothing but a simple barrel and a lamp, wandering Athens in the middle of the day, claiming to be searching for an honest man. Diogenes stripped away the layers of societal expectation, possessions, even comfort, revealing something radical beneath the surface: the power of radical self-reliance and inner clarity. His poverty was chosen, a conscious rejection of external validation in favor of internal sovereignty. He understood that to be free, one must first be willing to lose everything that society says you need. Or look at the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, who walked away from princely privilege not because he hated wealth, but because he saw it as a veil over the true nature of existence. His path wasn't one of abandonment for its own sake, but was a profound reclaiming of agency over suffering, a method of disengaging from the intoxication of desire to awaken to a deeper, unshakable peace. Through this, he demonstrated that spiritual poverty is not a state of deprivation, but an invitation to profound abundance, one that cannot be measured in possessions, but only in awakening. These examples illuminate a truth that must be held in tension. Reclaiming your spirit does not mean rejecting the world but reframing your relationship to it. It demands a shift from external validation to internal validation, from fragmentation to coherence. In a culture designed to pull you apart, atomize your attention, and sell you back fragments of yourself disguised as salvation. But how does this look in your modern life? How do you begin to dismantle the architecture of scarcity that quietly governs your thoughts? It begins with recognizing your mind as a territory over which you hold sovereignty, not a playground of compulsions. Instead of fighting the noise with more noise, the radical step is to cultivate silence, to carve out spaces where the internal dialogue can be heard beyond the static. This means refusing the constant bombardment of must have and must be, opting instead for deep inquiry. What do you truly value? What does your spirit crave beyond the screen, beyond the likes, beyond the brand? The power lies in the questions themselves, more than any immediate answer. When you reclaim the right to ask, and to sit with the discomfort that often follows, you begin to unravel the automatic responses programmed into you. The mind's usual refuge in distraction or denial starts to lose its hold, revealing the contours of a previously hidden freedom. This is a revolution of consciousness, quieter than political upheaval but infinitely more profound. In practical terms, this might mean choosing solitude over social media, actual presence over curated facades, or radical honesty over polite compliance. It might mean embracing uncertainty rather than clinging to the illusion of control, or allowing yourself to feel pain instead of numbing it with busyness. Each small act of choosing presence over distraction chips away at the walls of the prison, until suddenly you realize they were never as solid as they appeared. This process is not a sprint but a gradual unlearning, a mindful excavation of the layers of conditioning that have obscured your spiritual vision. Think of it as reclaiming a lost language, one encoded in silence, reflection, and intuitive knowing, rather than in the clamor of constant updating and consuming. You are learning to interpret the subtle signals that your soul has been sending in whispers beneath the roar. And here is the most revolutionary insight. You are not merely a passive subject to forces beyond your control, but the very architect of your inner world. You hold the pen that writes your story, the brush that colors your perception. By shifting your narrative from scarcity to sufficiency, from fear to curiosity, you reclaim the power to transform not only your experience, but also the reality you inhabit. So as you stand at this crossroads, confronted with the vast terrain of spiritual poverty, do not despair. The epidemic spreads because it is hidden in plain sight, because it thrives on forgetfulness and silence. But your awakening, your conscious turning toward presence, becomes an act of defiance, a reclamation of sovereignty that no external system can take away. You are discovering the truth that those who broke free before you knew well. Spiritual abundance was never about what was missing, but about what was always there, waiting beneath the dust of distraction and the ruins of false idols. It is a state of being accessible not through more but through less, a sanctuary that blooms when you stop chasing and start unfolding. In this radical reorientation, you find the key to dismantle the epidemic holding the world in its grip. You become a beacon not by adding voice over noise, but by embodying a stillness that speaks louder than words, a presence that pierces through the fog, and a freedom that invites others to remember what they too have forgotten. This is no utopian dream. It is the revolution of awakening itself, quietly transforming one soul at a time. What if everything you believed about scarcity and abundance, about lack and fulfillment, is a mirage carefully crafted by the very fabric of your conditioning? Imagine for a moment that spiritual poverty, the emptiness gnawing at your soul, is not a void to be filled but a distortion to be seen through. What if the hunger you feel, the aching absence that drives your relentless striving, is the echo of a deeper truth that lies just beyond the edges of your perception? You have been told to seek outwardly, more possessions, more validation, more experiences, and yet here you stand, still restless, still yearning. Why does desire, once kindled, swell into an unquenchable fire? Because the hunger you chase is not hunger at all. It is a veil, a shadow cast upon your consciousness that obscures the radiant source beneath. What if the epidemic of spiritual poverty is not a lack to be cured, but an illusion to be pierced? Pause now and reflect on this paradox. To find true abundance, you must first embrace the emptiness you fear. To reclaim your inner wholeness, you must confront the fragmentation you have tried desperately to ignore. It is not an invitation to despair, but an invitation to clarity, a reminder that your soul's deepest yearning is not for accumulation but for integration. This is the secret hidden in plain sight. The spiritual poverty you have suffered is not a deficiency within you. It is the byproduct of a world that teaches you to fragment yourself, to see your essence as separate from your surroundings, from others, and even from your own sacred being. The pandemic is not about what you lack, but about what you have forgotten, the seamless oneness that underpins existence. And here lies the final revelation. The reality you inhabit, your life, your struggles, your triumphs, is not a fixed landscape but a malleable interplay of perception and presence. The distinction between poverty and abundance is not a matter of external circumstance but of consciousness itself. When you shift your awareness from having to being, the contours of your experience transform. What once appeared barren becomes fertile ground. What once seemed constricting becomes expansive horizon. You have wandered through deserts not because the oasis was absent, but because you were led to look away from the wellspring within your own soul. The relentless chase to fill the void was a dance with shadows, and now the light you seek has begun to seep through the cracks of your awareness. This light is not something to grasp, but something to embody, to rest within, to let radiate through your every breath. Consider the paradox of the ancients. The more you surrender to the present moment, the more the fullness of life reveals itself. Surrender is not defeat but the courageous act of laying down your illusions. It is the soil from which true abundance blooms, an abundance not measured by possessions or accolades, but by the richness of being fully alive, fully connected, fully awake. Look deeply into the mosaic of your own existence, and you will see that your past struggles, the loneliness, the disconnection, the despair, were not punishments but invitations. Each fracture was a gateway, each wound a teacher whispering the same truth. You are not alone, you are not broken, you are not lacking. You are whole, even in your seeming brokenness. You are a vast ocean disguised as a fragile drop of water, a boundless sky veiled as a fleeting cloud. This is your awakening, the revolution that no external power can extinguish. To live in spiritual abundance is to live in radical awareness, to move through life with eyes wide open to the hidden unity beneath the surface of separation. It is the recognition that every breath you take is a thread woven into the tapestry of existence, that your story is not isolated, but intertwined with the eternal dance of all that is. And so, as you stand here, at the very edge of understanding, let this truth settle like a seed in the fertile ground of your being. The epidemic of spiritual poverty will end not through rescue or accumulation, but through remembrance. Remember who you are beneath the masks of scarcity and fear. Remember the boundless essence that has always been and will always be. Remember that abundance is the natural state, the baseline of your existence, waiting patiently for you to come home. In this remembrance, the world shifts. Time loosens its grip. The noise falls away, and you find yourself resting in the silent witness of your own being, the infinite wellspring from which all things flow. This is not a destination. It is a journey without end, a dance without final step, a light without shadow. So now ask yourself, will you continue to wander in the deserts of illusion, or will you turn inward to the oasis of your true self? Will you awaken to the richness that has been there all along, hidden beneath the dust of distraction? The choice is yours, and in that choice lies your freedom. Walk forward with this revelation as your compass. Let it haunt your complacency and inspire your soul. Let it reshape your understanding of reality so profoundly that all previous struggles become stepping stones rather than weights. This is your call to radical awakening, your invitation to reclaim the abundance that no one can ever take away, the abundance that is, and always has been, already you.